introduce the moderator, who will have the honor of introducing the distinguished author, David Lipsky. The AViD series is funded by the Des Moines Public Library Foundation. With current budget cuts, it has been brought to our attention more than once that without the funding, the AViD series will not continue. With that in mind, I'd like to thank our 2010 sponsors: Humanities Iowa, Wells Fargo, Nationwide Insurance, Douglas and Deborah West, Hoyt Sherman Place, Drake University, and the Iowa History Center at Simpson. It is my pleasure to welcome you for tonight's presentation by distinguished author David Lipsky, but I do have a few housekeeping issues. Remind you to turn your cell phones off, please. And in your program tonight, you will find an evaluation form, and it would be really nice if you could complete that for us and leave it with us tonight. You'll notice that there's also a contribution envelope in your programs, and feel free to fill that out too. After the presentation, there will be a brief question and answer session with David, and Barnes & Noble will be selling books that David will be happy to autograph for you. Now I'd like to introduce you to tonight's moderator, Matt McIver. He's the artistic director of, and education director actually, of the Des Moines Social Club, which is a center dedicated to Iowa artists of all media and genres. Prior to moving to Des Moines, Matt spent 11 years in New York City acting, writing, and directing. Please welcome Matt McIver.
Thank you very much, Hubbell and everyone. I'm very excited to be here this evening and to introduce you to a wonderful author, David Lipsky. David is that rarest of rare things, a native New Yorker who still lives in the city. He was a graduate of Stuyvesant High School and Brown University and took his MFA in creative writing from Johns Hopkins. In 1989, his first collection of short stories, $3,000, was published and received plaudits from Raymond Carver and a number of other folks. In 1996, his first novel, The Art Fair, was published. And in 2003, he proved his skills in the realm of nonfiction with Absolutely American, chronicling the life of West Point cadets, among whom he spent 4 years. I believe it was 60 notebooks and 4 pairs of boots. In 1996, as his first novel was preparing to be published, David spent 5 days on assignment from Rolling Stone magazine with David Foster Wallace, whom he will speak about in some greater detail. David Foster Wallace was in the middle of one of the most extraordinary successes, and the record of that 5 days forms the book, although of course you end up becoming yourself, which we're here to talk about tonight. The book has earned the kind of praise that would make David Foster Wallace, or indeed anyone of modesty, blush. Liv Grossman in Time magazine said that Lipsky's transcript of their brilliant conversation reads like a two-man stopper play or a four-handed duet scored for a typewriter. Menachem Kaiser in The Atlantic says the conversations are far-reaching, insightful, silly, very funny, profound, surprising, and awfully human. This is plaudits earned in addition to the acclaim for Lipsky's Absolutely American, which was described as mesmerizing and powerfully human. Spectacle, again by Liv Grossman, and also for The Art Fair, which, in one of my favorites, James Atlas in Vogue said, Lipsky perfectly captures the snobbery of artists and dealers, the tiny gestures of cruelty that confirm or withhold status. Such status would be such an interesting subtext, although of course you end up becoming yourself. David Foster Wallace, as probably many of you are aware, was perhaps the leading writer of his generation. In a wonderful piece in Rolling Stone that came out shortly after his death, also by David Lipsky, not coincidentally. It said, David Foster Wallace works surprising turns on nearly everything: novels, journalism, vacation. His life was an information hunt, collecting hows and whys. I received 500,000 discrete bits of information today, he once said, of which maybe 25 are important. My job is to make some sense of it. He wanted to write stuff about what it feels like to live, instead of being relief from what it feels like to live. And when Wallace turned to nonfiction, two pieces published in Harper's would become some of the most famous pieces of journalism of the past decade and a half. In the pieces, Wallace invented a style writers have plundered for a decade. And I can say from personal experience that's extremely true. The unedited camera, the feed before the director in the van starts making choices and cuts. The voice was humane, a big, kind brain tripping over its own lumps. The cruise ship piece, entitled A Supposedly Fun Thing I'll Never Do Again, ran in January 1996, a month before Infinite Jest was published. People photocopied it, faxed it to each other, read it over the phone. When people tell you they're fans of David Foster Wallace, what they're often telling you is they've read the cruise ship piece. Wallace would make it the title essay in his first collection of journalism. You can, in a way, the difference between the fiction and the nonfiction reads as the difference between Wallace's social self and his private self. The essays were endlessly charming. They were the best friend you'd ever have, spotting everything, whispering jokes, sweeping you past what was irritating or boring or awful in a humane style. Wallace's fiction, especially after Infinite Jest, would turn chilly, dark, abstract. You could imagine the author of the fiction sinking into a depression. The nonfiction writer was an impervious sun. It is our good fortune to have 5 days of that sun captured in the wonderful book, although of course you end up becoming yourself. And it is my good fortune to be able to introduce to you Mr. David Lipsky.
That was great, Ellen. Thank you, Matt. I think after that, I can be very confident saying it. This will all be a letdown. Thank you for coming in. Please bear with us. In 1996, David's book had come out, and it was just an extraordinary piece of work. And I don't know how many of you guys have been sort of Salinger fans, Salinger readers and oh, is my voice covering? You guys didn't know there'd be a fashion segment here. Is this okay? Okay, not okay. I can pin it to my lower lip. You guys heard that? What about now? Okay, so I'll use this lovely burgundy microphone. Okay. I'll go full dominate. You guys like dominate? How does this work? I actually can't hear it. You guys, okay, great. So I went and I had this extraordinary experience after his book came out. Here's how magazines work. The book had come out, it was being really well received, there were photographs of David everywhere. David wore a bandana and he had sort of longish hair and he had stubble. And so the guy who owns the magazine I worked for, Young Winter, saw the photo in the New York Times and he said, "Oh, I'm getting waves from the back. Still can't hear it? What about now?" I'm doing my best.
Can I hold the mic up?
I can swallow it. This you guys can hear now? So his photos in the New York Times, and Jan saw it, and he said, he looked at the long hair and the bandana and the stubble and said, "Oh, he's one of us, so send Lipsky." So I got to spend 5 days with David, and it was great because when David's book came out, it was really the first time for me as a reader since I read Salinger that I had that great experience of kind of opening a book, and instead of just finding words, kind of finding a mirror. You know what I mean? Seeing myself in everything he thought and in the way, the pace he found talking about the way people live their lives. And to be able to then spend 5 days traveling with David was an incredible experience. After he died, I, as someone who loved his work, was sort of sad to see that people were beginning to see him as having always been very sad, as having always been a grim person who was headed towards dying young. And so what I hope the book does for readers, people who have both never read him and who know his work, is just to show what he was like to be with. He was just the New York City, you meet a lot of people, both socially and then if you're a reporter, you meet people professionally, and he just is the most charming and witty, intelligent, and alive person I've ever met, and that's what I hope, as a kind of crow's net, this book captures. In my reading tonight, Matt's going to help. Matt's going to be reading the very dull, the very dull form of me. He's going to be reading my book, which is not terribly fun, actually. So Matt, thank you in advance for doing that. And I'm going to be reading some stuff David talked about while you're traveling. But before I do that, I just wanted to read kind of, oh, I see Jen. Okay, so I really should keep it. I should kiss the mic. Okay. So before we begin reading parts of the book, I wanted to read the opening of the book. I began the book talking about how David died because I hope when people read the book, they'll remember what he was like alive. And so I really wanted to have that stuff not be the last thing people thought about. So I'm going to read that stuff now, and then Matt and I will read some selections from the book of Proper. But first I'm going to have some water. That's cool. That was the longest sip of my life. Okay, you can still hear me? Great. Okay. So this is the opening of the afterword. David was 6'2", and on a good day, he weighed 200 pounds. He had dark eyes, a soft voice, caveman chin, a lovely peak-lipped mouth that was his best feature. He walked with an ex-athlete saunter, a roll from the heels, as if any physical thing was a pleasure. He wrote with eyes and a voice that seemed to be a condensed form of everyone's lives. It was the stuff you semi-thought, the background action you blinked through at supermarkets and commutes, and readers curled up in the nooks and clearings of his style. His life was a map that ends at the wrong destination. He was an A student through high school. He played football. He played tennis. He wrote a philosophy thesis and a novel before he graduated from Amherst. He went to writing school, published the novel, made a city of squalling, bruising, and kneecapping editors and writers fall moony-eyed in love with him. He published a 1,000-page novel, received the only award you get in the nation for being a genius, wrote essays providing the best feel anywhere of what it means to be alive now, accepted a special chair to teach writing at a college in California, married, published another book, and hanged himself at age 46. Suicide is such a powerful end, it reaches back and scrambles the beginning. It has an event brevity. Eventually, every memory and impression gets tugged in its direction. I was asked to write about David's death and spoke to friends, all writers, all called away from keyboards, all stunned, and family, who were smart and kind, and so nearly impossible to talk to. One thing they struggled with was how alive, how delightful David could seem. I talked with a professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, who spoke in quick, lucid, emphatic phrases, as if facts were neutral, but could turn sad if handled for too long. The professor did what experts do, reminded me he hadn't treated David personally, but could illustrate the basic principles, which are, nobody likes to take medications. I mean, I sympathize, the doctor said. I don't like to take any medicine myself. I told him what I'd learned, that from 1989 on, David had been prescribed a powerful first-generation antidepressant called Hubbell. It came towing a boxcar of 1950s-era side effects, the worst of which was a potential for very high blood pressure. In 2007, he had decided to stop taking the drug. The doctor made the kind of quick silence that's the telephone equivalent of nodding. There's a pattern. When an agent has worked particularly well, people can't possibly imagine getting depressed again. So there's this false security. They feel they're fine, they're cured, and it'd be great to get off the medicine. Unfortunately, it's quite common to see people can and often do experience a recurrence of symptoms, and then they might not respond the same way to previously effective treatments. Here's how it happened for David. Hubbell comes with a long, interdicted menu: chocolate, cured meats, certain cheeses, for some reason, overripe bananas. And then there are off-book ingredients waiting in dishes to combine and catalyze. The previous half-decade of David's life, everyone agrees, was the happiest. Marriage, tranquility, California, the sunset, happy ending coast. In late spring of 2007, David, his wife Karen, and his parents Jim and Sally sat down at a Persian restaurant. Something in the food took him wrong. Terrible stomach pains for days. Doctors were surprised to hear how long he'd been taking Norville, a workhorse medication from the pre-digital era of leaded fuels and antenna TV. They suggested he go off the drug, try something new. So at that point, his sister Amy said, her voice sounding sober and bruised, it was determined, oh well gosh, we've made so much pharmaceutical progress in the last 2 decades that I'm sure we can find something that can knock out that pesky depression without all these side effects. They had no idea that was the only thing keeping him alive. The course David followed is called a washout. David would slowly taper off the old drug, then taper onto a new one. He knew it was going to be rough, Jonathan Franzen told me. Franzen's novel, The Corrections, won a National Book Award. He was the best friend in the second part of David's adult life. But he was feeling he could afford a year to do the job. He figured he was going to go on to something else, at least temporarily. He was a perfectionist, you know. He wanted to be perfect, and taking Norville wasn't perfect. It's something Franzen wanted to stress. David had a level of self-criticism that sometimes made him the one person whose company he didn't enjoy in a pleasant room. Now he was happy. He loved his marriage, his life. This is the main narrative, Franzen says. It's reason number 1 among the 9. It was from the position of optimism and happiness and strength that he tried to take another step. All the signs were pointing in the right direction. Because things were going well, he thought he was in a strong enough position to make some fundamental changes. And he had bad luck. It didn't work. Doctors began prescribing other medications, each one a failure. By October, David's symptoms had landed him back in the hospital. He began to drop weight. That fall, he looked like a college kid again. Longish hair, eyes intense, as if he'd just stepped off the Amherst screen. When Amy talked to him by phone, he was sometimes his old self. She said, the worst question you could ask David in the last year was, how are you? And it's almost impossible to have a conversation with someone you don't see regularly without that question. David was very honest. He'd answer, I'm not all right. I'm trying to be, but I'm not all right. The year ran good and bad, fast then slow, ascents with sudden pits, the sky looking very distant overhead. In early May, he sat down at a cafe with some graduating seniors from his fiction class. He answered their jittery, writer's future questions. At the end, his voice went throaty. He choked out. Students assumed he was joking. Some smiled, a memory that would cut later. David sniffled. Go ahead and laugh. Here I am crying. But I really am going to miss all of you. No medications had worked. In June, David tried to kill himself. Then he was back in the hospital. Doctors administered 12 courses of electroconvulsive therapy, a treatment that had always terrified David. 12, his mother repeated. Such brutal treatments, his father said. And after this year of absolute hell for David, his mother said, they decided to go back to the Norville. Franzen, worried, flew to spend a week with David in July. David had dropped 70 pounds in a year. He was thinner than I'd ever seen him. There was a look in his eyes, terrified, terribly sad, and far away. Still, he was fun to be with, even at 10% strength. David could now make skinny jokes. He'd never before noticed, he said, how hard certain chairs were in the house. Franzen would sit with David in the living room, play with his dogs. The two would step outside while David lit a cigarette. We argued about stuff. He was doing his usual line about, a dog's mouth is practically a disinfectant, it's so clean. Not like human saliva. Dog saliva is marvelously germ-resistant. When he left, David thanked him for coming. I felt grateful he allowed me to be there, Franzen told me. 6 weeks later, David asked his parents to fly west. The Norville wasn't working. The great risk with taking time off an antidepressant. A patient departs, returns, and the medication has boarded its doors. David couldn't sleep. He was afraid to leave the house. He asked, what if I meet one of my students? His father said he didn't want anyone to see him the way he was. It was just awful to see. If a student saw him, they would have put their arms around him and hugged him, I'm sure. The Wallaces stayed 10 days. David and his parents would get up at 6 in the morning and walk the dogs. They watched DVDs, talked. Sally cooked David's favorite dishes, heavy comfort foods, pot pies, casseroles, strawberries, and cream. We kept telling him we were so glad he was alive, his mother said. But my feeling is that even then, he was leaving the planet. He just couldn't take it. One afternoon before they left, David was very upset. His mother sat on the floor beside him. I just rubbed his arm. He said he was glad I was his mom. I told him it was an honor. In the middle of September, Karen left David alone with the dogs for a few hours. When she came home that night, he had hanged himself. I can't get that image out of my mind, his sister told me, and said another smart, kind, and possible thing. David and his dogs, and it's dark. I'm sure he kissed them on the mouth and told them he was sorry. So that's how David died. And I wanted to get that out of the way. It's one of the first things people read in the book, because what the book is about how incredibly in love David Wallace is and was, and how he is this kind of self that you meet when you're reading his fiction, when you're reading his nonfiction. So Matt and I are going to read some stuff from the 5 days when I was traveling around with David. And the first thing we're going to read is David kind of both making fun of the awful food that I eat when I'm traveling, and then talking about some cultural things that he likes. So Matt, if you could start.
Can everyone hear me? Okay. Airport restaurant. I've got the burger deluxe, cheese slab, crunchy lettuce, block cut fries. David stares.
I'm not even going to start on the idea of eating a hamburger at 7 in the morning. The idea is to eat eggs, which are kind of a latent form, as your body itself is awakening. It makes a lot of sense, because you're the food, and you're supposed to eat stuff that's nice to you.
I guess following the life cycle stuff too. Eggs in the morning, meat at night, birth to death.
And then by the end, you're basically partially decomposed creatures. So, and then because he'd been watching me eat just really dreadful stuff for 5 days, we go back to his house in Bloomington, Illinois. I was in his kitchen, and I seen him take vitamins. He was taking much better care of himself than I was. And,
I saw all those vitamins in your hotel room. Where's that at?
I was told that if you smoke a lot or do a lot of nicotine, you have to take megavitamins. I take between 3,000 and 5,000 milligrams of vitamin C. I aim for urine the color of a legal pad. These are emergency reserve ones, are like 500 milligrams. You're just a pain in the butt. You've got to drink like a whole soda pop to take one. And he turns to his dogs and says, we'll give him some right now, because it looks like he's going to start feeling a little bit poorly.
You give vitamins to your dogs?
No, you. You can't run the camel at both ends of that. You're not getting enough sleep, you're not eating right, working too hard, on the go, busy 90s man.
Do I just take all these?
Yeah, but not all at once. Else they'll make the show. You take them one at a time in a precise little anal philosophical way. And then we're kind of walking around the house, and I notice this cultural thing you really care a great deal about.
So, thinking about the Alanis Morissette poster for a second. I just think it's funny, and I want...
It's silly, but I left it up in the care.
Why? I mean, she's pretty, I guess.
She's pretty, but she's pretty in a sloppy, very human way. There's something about a lot of women in magazines are pretty in a way that isn't erotic, because they don't look like anybody you know. You can't imagine them putting a quarter on a parking meter or eating a bologna sandwich. And her, even though I'm smart enough to know part of that image is crafted sloppiness, there's a kind of sexiness in spite of that's very, I don't know, I just find her absolutely riveting.
Walking into your house, there were a lot of things that I expected to see, but this was not one of them.
Well, I mean, I'm susceptible like everybody else. And then we're driving. Well, a lot of the book is us driving across the Midwest, and we're really happy with them with weather. And so we're sitting there.
I hold off on running REM for him until we get clear of the O'Hare debris field, the horrible choked jam of an airport with people driving crazy, distracted, nervous on the way in, or crazy, distracted, slow on the way out, talking with someone they've retrieved in love. On the road, we can enjoy it with some cigarettes and some speed. You were talking before about your Alanis Morissette obsession.
The Alanis Morissette obsession followed the Melanie Griffith obsession, a 6-year obsession. It was preceded by something that I will tell you I got teased a lot for, which was a terrible Margaret Thatcher obsession. All through college. Posters of Margaret Thatcher, ruminations on Margaret Thatcher.
Sexual?
A unspecifically sexual, sensuous, perhaps.
Okay, you have to help me remember to bring that up.
It's more involved like having tea with Margaret Thatcher, having her really enjoy something I said and lean forward and cover my hand with hers.
It's easy to forget I'm working. It seems more like I'm just driving with a friend. He's a natural, socially. You feel you want to work with him or for him. You feel enlisted.
And then while we were driving, we started talking about pop music, and just something I thought was kind of sort of way. Whenever I hear country music now, I always think about this, so I thought I would read that. Like living in Bloomington, one of the things that I do, I mean, you have to listen to a lot of crappy country music. Because that's pretty much all there is on the radio when you're tired of listening to like Green Day on the one college radio station. And these country musics, they're just so, maybe since you left, I can't live, I'm drinking all the time and stuff. And I remember just being really impatient with it until I'd been living here for about a year. And all of a sudden I realized that what if you just imagine this absent lover they're singing to is just a metaphor? And what they're really singing to is to themselves or to God, Since you've left, I'm so empty, I can't live, my life has no meaning. But in a weird way, I mean, they're incredibly existentialist songs that have the patina of the accent, of the romantic crap on them, just to make it saleable. But with all the pathos and heart that comes out of them, is they're singing about something much more elemental being missing, and they're being incomplete without it than just, some girl in tight jeans or something.
And where else do you see that kind of nice stuff rising out of shit pop culture?
Oh, wow. Oh, beyond everything. I mean, even we were making jokes about Love Boat and Baywatch. Those the really commercial, really reductive shows that we so love to sneer at are also tremendously compelling. Because the predictability in pop art, the really formulaic stuff, the stuff that makes no attempt to surprise or do anything artistic, is so profoundly soothing. And even the densest or most tired viewer can see what's coming. It gives you a sense of order, that everything's going to be all right, that this is an area that will take care of you and won't in any way challenge you. It's like being wrapped in a chamois blanket and nestled against a big, generous hip, And, okay, maybe art-wise, not the greatest art, but the function it provides is deep in a certain way. And all this stuff is like deadly serious and really deep at the same time. I mean, it doesn't mean you should go around being some kind of scholar of pop culture and dismantling all the stuff. But we find that art finds a way to take care of you and take part, kind of despite itself, And like crabgrass, or like Jeff Goldblum says in Jurassic Park, life finds a way. And then I was going to talk about, before David went on the article, he went to get a PhD in philosophy at Harvard University, and while he was there, he had worked with practice jobs as an artistic and a spiritual crisis. And I was going to read about that for a moment. It sounds weird, but I think it was almost more of like a sort of religious and artistic crisis than it was anything you would call breakdown. All my reasons for being alive and all the stuff that I thought was important, just truly at a gut level, weren't working anymore. Does this make any sense to you personally at all? Because by this time, seeing my egos are all invested in the writing, right? It's the only thing that I've gotten, food pellets from the universe for, to the extent that I wanted. And so I would do all kinds of things. I mean, I would drink real heavy. I would date strangers. Oh God. But then for 2 weeks I wouldn't drink, and I'd run 10 miles every morning. That kind of desperate, very American, I will fix this somehow by taking radical action.
Like Jennifer Beals, more or less, in Flashdance, solving Pittsburgh.
And it's weird. I think a lot of it comes out of sports training. Maybe because of Schwarzenegger was. If there's a problem, I will train my way out of it. I will get up earlier. I will work harder. And that crap worked on me when I was a kid, but, and then he decided to put himself into McLean as this kind of got worse. And he's talking, he says, I'm not concerned, I don't mind having somebody know I was on suicide while I'm complaining. I'm concerned, I don't want to make this into a romantic, lurid, tormented artist thing. This was more just, I think I had lived an incredibly American life that, boy, if I could just achieve X and Y and Z, everything would be okay. And I think I got very lucky. I got to have a midlife crisis at 27, which at the time didn't seem lucky. Now it seems to me fairly lucky. And now maybe you can understand that period, nothing before or since has ever been that bad for me. And I am willing to make enormous sacrifices never to go back there. And then he begins talking about some of the treatments. And he says that I'm not biochemically depressed, but I think I got the tip to dip my toe into that wading pool. And not going back there is more important to me than anything. It's like worse than anything. I don't know if you've had any experience with this. It's worse than any kind of physical injury or any kind of, it may be what in the old days was called a spiritual crisis. It's just feeling as though every axiom of your life turned out to be false. And there was actually nothing, and you were nothing. And it was all a delusion. And yet you were better than everyone else because you saw that it was a delusion. And yet you were worse because you couldn't function. And it was just horrible. And trying to be at Harvard and to read about freedom of the will with John Rawls while thinking this way was just extremely unpleasant. And so I decided that I need to find a few things that I believe in order to stay alive. And one of them is that I am extraordinarily lucky to be able to do this kind of work. And along with that comes a tremendous obligation to do the very best I can, which means I have to structure my life, sort of like anybody who's dedicated to something, to maximize my ability to do good stuff. And that doesn't make me a great person. It just makes me a person who's really exhausted a couple of other ways to live, and really taken them to their conclusion, which for me was a pink room with no furniture and a drain in the center of the floor, which is where they put me for an entire day when they thought I was going to kill myself. Where you don't have anything on and somebody's observing you through a slot in the wall. And when that happens to you, you get unprecedentedly willing to examine other alternatives for how to live. Anyway, that's the story. And I don't mind, it's not a privacy issue. I'd be concerned. I don't want to come off like I'm romanticizing it or something.
Somehow this is the saddest.
And then, his best friend, when he was at Harvard, was this roommate from Amherst named Marcus Della. And when he went to McLean, he asked Marcus Della, he called him and said, I'm in the hospital, can you come and meet me? So this is Marcus Della. It was a scary place. The first night he went in there, this is Dave, right? Kind of, he's a guy who does have his comforts, right? So his first night he goes in there, and he calls me and he says, are you coming out? Yeah, sure. Here's some things I need. Every little thing. He had a bathrobe he really liked, terry cloth bathrobe that was really comfortable. And he wanted his TV. And he, of course, wanted 25 cartons of cigarettes and some other stuff, too. It might have been some work. Yeah, you really had a lot of work done there. So I parked the car at McLean's, which is, if you've ever seen it, it's sort of like the Munsters. It's on a sort of gated parkway with gables and stuff. And I don't have enough arms to carry all the stuff. So I put on the bathrobe because I can't carry it. And then I pick up the other stuff. So I go into the wrong building. I go into the psychotic, the really sort of dangerous psychotic building. And they think I'm a escaped psychotic. So I say to the woman, I'm here to see Dave Wallace. And he's not in existence there because it's the wrong building. And she's like, looking at him to stay calm. And I turn around and there's two Belmont cops, and the kind of way they open up 4 feet of space to leave you in. And I'm like, no, really? I'm a guy in a bathrobe carrying a TV, but I'm not crazy. So it takes a while to work that out, so I get to see Dave. And I get there late and I explain what happens. And of course he thought, wow, you were a real fool. He loved that. He loved that it happened to me, certainly. So then Matt and I were going to read about what David did. One of the amazing things to me as a great lover of his work is that David went from being in McLean and kind of having his life stop for the week he was there to within a couple of years of getting out, being writing for Jackson and running in 3 years. And this is what we're going to read now is about the jobs that he took after he got out. So Matt got a law firm job in New York. He moved away, and I lived in that apartment alone for quite a while. Yeah, I got a job teaching that spring. That spring I worked as a security guard at the Lotus Software Corporation.
What did you do then?
I have yet to integrate that into my experience. I had never worn polyester every day for 3 months.
Funny, my phone conversation with his sister, Amy, a few weeks later. Amy's story is about David loving cotton. purloining any shirt of hers, even the girliest, if he liked the weave.
And I had to wear polyester, and I carried what was called a service baton. And this other security guard showed me, the tricks cops have, the various ways, which I wasn't great at, but I was fairly good at. And I just remember walking. My shift it was weird. It was, I'd go in super early in the morning until like mid-morning. And in the early morning, nobody would be there. And I'd just walk up to these fluorescent lights, twirling my baton, thinking about as little as possible.
Did you think you were done then?
Yeah, I was pretty sure life was over.
This is after the suicide watch is done? Bonnie told me when she came to visit McLean and first saw him, the first thing she did was to find a scissors so she could cut his hair. It looked so awful to her.
But anyway, and then, the next couple of years were fairly dull. I finally got a job, I think, the next fall.
Let's do it chrono. It's interesting about the crap jobs.
Okay, but I've got an even better one. You know what I'm going to talk about, man. Okay, so I worked for a while as a security guard at Lewis, and then quit for the incredibly grave reason that I got tired of getting up so early in the morning.
How long?
3.5 months.
Faulkner worked that kind of job too, when he wrote As I Lay Dying all night.
How do you know all this stuff? Is there some masterwork biographies or writers that you just...
Yeah, there's this little baseball card series you can collect, stats on the back. You have to subscribe to it.
Yeah, this wasn't great though, because you had to check in every 10 minutes and give meaningless reports, all figure at this people. Like Lewis was incredibly paranoid about industrial espionage, but I was so new that I wasn't given access to any of the cleared areas. So I had to go around like, this hallway was secure. And they were always worried you were not going to clock in. I don't know, what was it like? It was like every bad 60s novel about meaningless authority. And it was just...
And you were walking around thinking, my God, I had 2 books come out when I was very young.
No. As a matter of fact, I remember one reason I liked that job is I walked around not thinking. It's really like, there's a sleeping tile. There's a cubicle. Jeeves like his dogs. His 2 dogs are really Jeeves is the dog in David's lap on the photograph, and they keep kind of wandering around while we're talking.
Jeeves whines. I tap him on the nose to quiet him. David looks as if I've overstepped my bounds. It stops him talking. Sorry.
Actually, he needed it. Jeeves, see, look, you're pissing even the guests off. Even the guest is swatting him. He just gets upset when Drone eats his food. Drone is kind of being a bully.
But me too.
All right, but anyway, I quit that job basically because I just didn't want to get up that early in the morning anymore. Hush, sit, good dog. Now you stay, you hush. And then I got a job, this is the worst. I worked as a towel boy at something called the Auburndale Health Club in Watertown, which was a very chic. They called me something other than a towel boy, but I was in effect a towel boy, who every once in a while was entrusted with the job of checking people in and having them show their card, and then working out on an unbelievably inelegant and clunky computer system how many visits they had. But anyway, okay, here's why I quit that job, is that I'm sitting there working that job, and who should walk in to get their towel but Michael Ryan. Michael Ryan is a very famous poet who wrote a memoir a couple years before I went to talk with David. It was called Secret History. It was about his romantic life. And the secretest history was that his romantic life began when he romanced the family dog. And so David and I are petting his 2 dogs while we're talking about this. Now, Michael Ryan, who's best known now for a book called Secret Life, which was this kind of pretty heroistic memoir. But at the time, yeah, not to mention as we're petting dogs. But anyway, Michael Ryan had received the Writing Writers Award the same year I had, like 2 years earlier in 1987. So I see this guy that I've met on this damn rostrum with, having Eudora Welty give us this prize. And 2 years later, I'm like, and I can remember, I can see, it's the only time I've literally dived under something to have somebody who would sing. Like he came in and I pretended not very subtly to slip and went under the counter and had the lady that was there. And I forget, I think I lay face down and didn't respond. And she, of course, didn't want to be going, David, what's wrong? While a guest was there. So she gave him the towel. And I remember I somehow worked the rest of that day. I think I would peer around corners to see what room he was in, and then dash and put the towel on the towel bed. And I remember I left that day, and I didn't go back.
David's editor, Jerry Howard. I contemplated the circumstance that the best young writer in America was handing out towels in a health club, Howard says. How damn sad.
And then at the end of at the end of our 5 days, we've gone back to his house, and we were just talking. I don't know if it's clear from what I've read how much fun it is to be around, but I just didn't want to leave, so I keep asking him questions about his guys' feelings about life, and just anything. He studies about tobacco, he studies about mowing the lawn. But this is where he's talking actually about how he thinks people should live, and it's kind of how it begins, and it's something I think is really great, so I actually put it on the back of the book, so this is the last thing I will read.
What's important, you've been saying to me, is a certain basic humanity.
Yeah, sort of, who do I live for? What do I believe in? What do I want? I mean, they're the sorts of questions so profound and so deep that they sound banal when you say them out loud.
I think every generation finds new excuses for why people behave in a basically ugly manner. The only constant is the bad behavior. I think our excuse now is media and technology.
I think the reason why people behave in an ugly manner is that it's really scary to be alive and to be human, and people are really, really afraid. And that the reasons, that the fear is the basic condition, and there are all kinds of reasons for why we're so afraid. But the fact of the matter is that the job we're here to do is to learn how to live in a way that we're not terrified all the time, and not in a position of using all kinds of different things and using people to kind of keep that terror at bay. That is my personal opinion. And for me, as an American male, the face I put on the terror is the dawning realization that nothing's enough, you know? That no pleasure is enough, that no achievement is enough, that there's a kind of queer dissatisfaction or emptiness at the core of the self that is unassuageable by outside stuff. And my guess is that's been what's going on ever since people were hitting each other over the head with clubs. They're describable in a number of different words and cultural archetypes, and that our particular challenge is that there's never been more and better stuff coming from the outside that seems sort of temporarily to fill the hole or drown out the hole.
Could it be assuageable by internal means also?
Personally, I believe that if it's assuageable in any way, it's by internal means. And I don't know what that means. I think it's fine in some way. I think it's probably assuageable by internal means. I think those internal means have to be earned and developed, and it has something to do with the pop psych phrase is loving yourself. It's more like if you can think of times in your life that you've treated people with extraordinary decency and love and pure, uninterested concern just because they were valuable as human beings. The ability to do that with ourselves, to treat ourselves the way we would treat a really good, precious friend or a tiny child of ours that we absolutely loved more than life itself. And I think it's probably possible to achieve that. I think part of the job we're here for is to learn how to do it. I know that sounds a little biased. Thank you. And Matt's going to take questions. So.
Are there questions? Oh, we've got them. They got written down, and if you want to pass them towards Jen. Go ahead, Marcus. The form on which to write questions is in your programs. I'm reliably informed. Question: do you have any interest in writing a more conventional biography of David Foster Wallace? Or what about reading one?
I think it'd be really fun to read one. Who asked that question, by the way? It's an excellent question. Thanks a lot. I think it'd be interesting to read one. I didn't want to write one because, you know, I think that for me as a reader, one of the things I would be curious about is what the person's like, you know, and how they see their own life. And sometimes when I'm reading a biography, the narrator says, you know, he must have felt, or she probably said to friends. I don't really get a sense of what the person is. And to have David telling his own story the way he does in the book, and to give the reader the sense of, I hope he came through from what we were reading, is kind of incredibly funny and sharp and amazingly alive. Much like when we went into we went to a reading principle from the trip abroad, and we kind of pulled in and we walked to the hotel desk. We were signing in, and the hotel clerk said to me, "Your room has 2 twins." And David said quickly, "Yes, and he did in Consuelo." To be with someone who would walk into a Denny's, I was very surprised because we were both smoking, and I said I was surprised there was a smoking section there. He said, "Yeah, there's even a chain smoking section." It's amazingly fast and amazingly just chance to give readers the opportunity to spend 5 days with them that way seemed much more valuable than the conventional allowed.
Are you an introvert or an extrovert? How does this impact you as a writer? As a writer, W-R-I-T-E-R, and as a rider, R-I-D-E-R, in a car for 5 days.
Who asked that question? No one's going to answer that?
That's what it is.
David said a great thing about being shy. He said that the real problem with being shy is if you meet someone, you don't even know anything concerned with whether you like them, because the thing you're asking yourself is, do they like me? And he said he had elements of that kind of shyness. And he said that basically he thought that all writers were kind of thwarted performers who didn't want to do their thing live, but actually wanted to find some way, as he was saying, to question their consciousness and other people. So I guess I would say that I'm extremely extroverted for a writer, but for a normal person, I would say I'm criminally shy. But the funny thing about David considered himself really shy, but he was really the most charming person I've ever been with. So I think people's self-estimations can be hard along with the shyness, extroversion, Thank you.
What do you think David would have thought about West Point?
I think who asked that question? Oh, great. The reason Kenneth asked my question is because I spent 4 years at West Point. I think he would have been fascinated by it. It's very funny, when I spent that time with him, there were things that he said to me that just kept every time, like really good writing. You guys found this, it's like having brain graffiti, like you can't get it. It's like more walls in your head stuck up there. And David said that he thought Americans were desperate to give themselves away to things, like disciplines or big kinds of things were to some pursuit, like fitness, like the tennis players, and men and chess, were the things like people in halfway house and chess. And of course, 2 years after I was with David, I was at the military academy where all these incredibly bright men and women had given themselves over to the military academy and this one in the Army. And so I kept thinking, how right David was. I mean, the people, I was amazed by how many law students there were. In the military academy. The night that David died, there's a post at West Point called First Captain. It's considered the sort of the best cadet there. And the guy who I guess was second captain, who was the person who almost became first captain, he was the first person that called after I got the news that David had died. And the fellow I'm talking about had won a Bronze Star for Valor in Iraq. He volunteered first time in Iraq. And it was very sensible. He was out of Stanford Law. He was a very sensible guy. And he started kind of crying on the phone. And he said that it was ridiculous, but he had always somehow hoped that he would meet David. And there were things that had happened to him in Iraq that he actually never told me. He was not 4 years ago. But he had somehow hoped in that way that he could go from your fan or he could tell David about it. He was sure that David would be something for him.
And I just want to contextualize this one briefly because your first novel came out the year that you spent this time with David. So you guys he was four or 5 years older than you?
That's right.
So roughly peers, the same sort of generation of writers. How do you feel David influenced you as a writer?
Well, he made me stronger. he just makes you want to try harder. But he said he was very modest, and he said that I'm not the smartest writer young, but I work really, really hard. And I'm not that great when I'm talking, when I get shy and self-conscious and very confused. But if you put me in a room for 24 hours with a desk, then I can be really, really smart. And so when I've gotten in trouble on things I was working on, I would just think, just give me those 24 hours. So he's made everyone. I mean, most writers I know kind of idolize David because he wrote. I mean, he discovered a new way of writing. He was every page of the comic is just sort of incredibly, it's full of impact and brilliant. So it makes it can be intimidating, but intimidating especially when you're by yourself. There's some purchase of the file.
A related question. Carson reads, the question you've been asked probably by every 20-something know-nothing, how do you find an audience / practice your craft to become successful?
What's that question? That's a question I would ask, so I'll say I asked that question from the time machine. It's very hard. I know that, you see that David But the advice, I think you just, I mean, the great thing about David's story is David thought he was done. There he was working with that organization, the health club. And then he just worked, he said this great thing. He said that in all the books beforehand, he had always written at like 3 quarters speed. He said that he asked me, that's not as you write your paper the night before, so it doesn't get a good grade. Well, if I really tried hard, I would have gotten the A. And he said, but this, he pointed it to this last. He said, this I tried the hardest I could be. This is the best I could do between 1992 and 1995. And so, what I would say to the me who would have asked that question, 15 years ago, or to whoever asked the question here, is just, push as hard as you can, try as hard as you can, because it's like David, I think that if you really think like that, you'll find something wonderful.
Did your 5 days with David Wallace change your attitudes towards life, / your thinking about issues, / illuminate you in any way?
Yeah, illuminated me in basically every way that fiction can and a social method can. I mean, the thing he was talking about trying to be under people, the right part of practicing New York City, but I'm trying to do that, and I've tried to work harder, and I've tried to, he said this great thing. At the end of the piece he wrote about John McCain, he's writing about how politics works and how reporting on politics works, and he said, look, just try to stay away. And so, I mean, that's one of the basic messages in this work, and I really try to stay away from that experience.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Why the pseudonym on I. Wallace?
Why the pseudonym? On Wallace L. Who answered that question? Oh, and what's her name?
Mark.
Since we were asking about the name. There's a great, if you like, 2 things. If you haven't read David Wallace before, I really recommend that you guys go to, David, it's hard to explain how nasty, if you guys all visited New York, and you guys walk on the streets and got a sense of hostility, maybe that's quite a good time to be writing in New York City. But people love David's work so much that for them, like Harper's, where he published a lot of his nonfiction, after he died, they just took all the stuff he wrote from and they put it online so you could get it for free because they loved his work so much. And so if you guys go to Harper's.org and just search David Wallace, you can download the cruise ship piece that Matt was talking about and the piece about going to the Lone State Fair. And I just think those are really good places to begin reading here.
Where did Wallace find his
okay, so the second thing, Mark, is that the other place to go if you once you like it, you go to a thing called Wallace L to listserv. It's where David's best readers go and they talk about his work, and they talk about what meant to them, and they talk about ways to read it. I mean, I started going there a long time ago because I love David's work and wanted to go out to the readers. And Mark, because I was very shy, I just had a fake name on the side because I didn't want to raise my hand in the classroom where everybody was smarter than I was. And there wasn't else to do that.
Which brings us to, where did Wallace find his humility, and how did he sustain it?
He just said that he found it. He felt that and I don't know that the anonymous person who asked about writing in your early mid-20s. David told me that when he was young, it was very hard to write because he thought about himself, I'm this genius writer, everything I do has to be ingenious, blah, 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 blah. And so it made him really uncomfortable when he actually would write, and what came out of his pen, as is often the case, it wasn't genius. And so what he said is he learned, he had a few things happen to him later in his 20s where he learned that he was not as smart as he thought he was, and a lot of people without formal education who didn't do the kind of work he did were a heck of a lot, I'm using a different word than he used, were a heck of a lot smarter than he was. And so I think that he said that he did that experience had been really useful and it actually helped him a lot. And that after that he realized that the main thing about writing is to try to have a conversation with somebody else. And if you think that you're smarter than other people, you can't have a conversation. But if you realize that in a lot of ways other people are smarter than you, then you can actually bring in contact with somebody else.
I think this is one coming out of your bio a little bit. How would you compare Wallace to John Barth?
John Barth was a professor at Hopkins where I had the good fortune to go to graduate school, and one of the nice things is that he was one of David's great writers when he was becoming a writer. I would say that in the way that many people work with artists, I think that David took some stuff that John Barth had done and just made it more fun, just maybe quicker and more fun.
If this is a bit of a long one, if finding the quote-unquote answer is an internal process, why does it seem that those looking there seem to have the greatest difficulty? Actually, the less ease in life, although supposedly searching in the right direction.
Who asked that question? Can you explain that a little bit? I'm not sure I followed it.
Well, I'm not sure I was following it myself when I was trying to write it out. It just seems like when you're talking about people, like Wallace, and they're really searching for the answers to life, as it were, and where is real happiness, and you're not going to find it out here in the external world. But it seems like those people are often the ones that suffer the most difficulties, as it were, and people that can just go along with the external factors just have a much easier time. And although, it would seem like if you're actually searching along the right road and the right path, that, it almost seems to take you farther away from what you're looking for in some cases, suicide, for instance.
I have nothing to add. That was great. That's great, actually. Yeah, I think it's very hard, and that's the hardest thing is to stay awake, is what David said. When you were saying that, I was thinking about one of the things that I was which is the boy asked hour, said that he just wanted people to believe in something. It didn't matter what it was, what religion was, as long as they believed in something, and it would make their lives easier. And I think that when you actually decide to try to figure out what you think personally, which David thought was his career. The reason why he thought it was very good luck to have a midlife crisis early. He said the way you were not get lucky, he said we realized those answers don't work. We get to start earlier to the business, and really work this deciding what does work for our lives. But as he said, it's very hard business. So I guess there's no more questions. Thank you guys were great, Jan. Thank you so much. Thank everybody.